Hey guys, welcome back to Andy's Dinosaur Reviews. Today we are checking out yet another brand new Mattel Jurassic World figure that has recently released. As you can see, what we are checking out today is the Roar Attack Metriacanthosaurus. There have only been a few, small handful of Metriacanthosaurus. I think maybe two prior to this. I'm pretty sure it was two. There might have been another and I can't recall. But this is the first time we've had it in the Roar Attack line, so that's pretty cool. And it's slightly different as far as, like, honestly, the only thing I'm really picking out, obviously we have a new paint scheme and a new action feature, but the only thing that's really obvious to me is the fact that there isn't any type of a seam here in the neck. On the older one, there was kind of like a seam where the top of the head was connected, and I will bring the older one in to take a look at it with this one here very soon, but that's really, besides the paint scheme and action feature, the only thing that I'm really noticing straight away that's new with the figure, and I was really wondering how different this one was in comparison to the previous one. I do want to give an absolutely huge shout out to Gojira IRL on Instagram, who hooked me up with this figure because this one's kind of like on the rarer side right now, I would say. It's, just only showing up in certain Walmarts, and I really wanted to get a hold of it, and I'm kind of concerned about maybe it not being all that readily available in the future, because we know how that works with the Mattel line. So since he had found one, I had asked him if he could locate another, and he hooked me up with this one right here. So a huge shout out to Gojira IRL for hooking me up with this. But again, the box art looks like pretty much your standard box art as far as the Dino Escape line goes. And then if we turn the box around and take a look here at the back, you can see that we have an image here of the Metriacanthosaurus itself, the action feature, and then kind of like a preview here of how you can open the mouth to different widths. And then down here we have an image showing off the other figures, I assume, in this wave with this particular Roar Attack figure, which we have reviewed all of these previously on the channel. These, I think, were actually the very first wave of Roar Attacks, so weird that this one, which I guess would technically be like the third wave of them, would show up with an image of the first wave. But regardless, it still looks pretty fun, so let's pop it out of the box and take a look at it. So here is our brand new variant of the Metriacanthosaurus, and I must say that I really like the paint scheme of this one so much better than the previous figures. However, I will also say that similar to a few of the other recent Roar Attacks, we have, well, actually similar to a lot of Mattel figures, but we have like only paint from here up, and then we don't have anything on the rear of the figure. But I will also say that it looks really nice regardless. Like, I don't feel like it really needed the paint in the back of the body. It would have looked, of course, nicer, but what we do have here already does look really nice, and I don't feel like anything looks out of place or weird because of the lack of paint. It does actually look pretty nice overall. So let's jump straight to a closer look at this right now. So as far as this figure goes, again, the sculpt looks pretty much the same as far as what we have here in comparison to the previous Metriacanthosaurus figures, so I don't think we really need to go over the sculpt itself, just basically what would be new with the figure in comparison to previous releases. And straight away, of course, one of the main things that would be different about this one compared to previous releases is the fact that we have a very different paint scheme. So for the head, we primarily have a nice brownish coloration, but there are some of those speckles that you can see here, those kind of trademark Mattel speckles with some black type of a speckling, but we also have this really nice reddish coloration that comes up and just kind of leaks into the face. You can see it runs up here around the eye. For some reason, Mattel loves to add that kind of gloss coat around the eyes of their figures. You can see the eye itself does have a gloss coat to it, but also around the eye has that glossy look. I know that they've done that a few times with the Alioramus and figures like that, but it's definitely something that they've done to this one as well, but I don't think it takes away from the figure. Normally, I'm not a huge fan of gloss coats like that, but it actually looks alright on this one. The eye itself doesn't appear to be perfectly placed, but it looks okay. And we do have a black pupil with a yellow eye, so that is a plus to see a black pupil on this figure, something we don't always get. We also have kind of a light, sort of a light yellow coloration here for the lower jaw, and that runs back here into the throat, but then instantly tapers off, and we don't have any more of that coloration, unfortunately. We can open the mouth, and the plus side of a Roar Attack figure means we have both articulation in the upper and lower jaws, unlike the previous versions of this figure, and you can see that inside we have a really nice tongue sculpt. and some decent detail up on the top, but nothing incredible. Really nice purplish tone for the inside of the mouth, as well as a nice gloss coat. I feel like the tone of color used is pretty realistic. And one thing to take note of is you can see that the tongue isn't really all that nicely textured, not like it usually is in comparison to more, newer sculpts from Mattel. So you can tell that that would be definitely the older sculpt as far as this figure goes. They haven't like updated it or anything with a newly textured tongue. You can also see the teeth are decently sculpted. They're a little bit kind of weird looking, but for the most part they look okay, and they are nicely painted with a yellow, like a light yellow, kind of bordering on an off-white, and there doesn't appear to be any sloppiness or anything with the teeth, so that's definitely a plus as well. Once we move here into the back, you start to see the red coloration transition to a really dark brown, almost like a black, but it's definitely a dark brown, but it's a very, very dark brown. And that runs here along the back of the Metriacanthosaurus, but ends right here above the hip region. And you can see it kind of leaks down here on the side a little bit here and there, but there's not really too much going on as far as that dark brown. It just kind of shows up. It's a little bit more abundant than what we see here on the red. The red area picks up on the top of the head, but then ends by the time we reach the neck, and then the brown picks up, but that ends before we even reach the tail of the dinosaur, right here in the hip region. We don't have any type of paint application for the nails or anything at all, but we do have, again, more of those speckles that are pretty much all over this figure, which I definitely do quite like. You can definitely see that the sculpt is phenomenally well done, like really, really highly detailed as far as this figure goes. And I really like the tail length of the Metriacanthosaurus. I always have. It's one of those few theropods from Mattel that I feel like the tail doesn't look unreasonably short. It doesn't look perfect, but it definitely doesn't look all that short either. But again, there is no other paint application out here onto the tail, nothing on the underside at all. Again, we have those speckles all over the place, but that's really about it aside from the primary brown body color. We do have the Jurassic Facts app code here if you would like to add it to your collection. Again, no nail paint here on the feet either, but we do have a gloss coat to the nails, so they shine kind of like real nails would, but there's no actual paint application, unfortunately, to them. And of course, everything's going to look the same over here on the opposing side of the figure. It looks really nice. I've always been a big fan of the sculpt of this dinosaur, but definitely a huge fan of this new paint scheme, even though, again, we only have paint up here on the top, and then there's like nothing else. From here down or back, there's just no other paint apps aside from the kind of speckling. But I actually really, really like it. I think it honestly is the best version of a Metriacanthosaurus paint scheme-wise that we've had so far. And then as far as the articulation of this newest version goes, again, we have the articulation in the jaw, which you can see is really smooth, really nice. We also have, upper and lower jaw articulation, which is something the older one didn't have. We also have arm articulation forward and back, as well as out away from the body. The leg articulation, I'm pretty sure everything else would probably be the same as the older one. You can also see the legs, move out away from the body as per usual. And we don't have any articulation in the tail, which I absolutely love. I don't feel like the Mattel figures need articulation like this out onto the tail, because honestly, it's not really that great to begin with, and it doesn't really look that natural when you're kind of like moving it around. I would prefer the tails just look like this. Of course, they're not always going to be like this because these are made for kids, and that's something kids would get a kick out of, would be articulation in the tail, but personally, I prefer it like this. So as far as the action feature goes, again, we have the roar attack. We're going to have this ugly open area here on the back that will use the button to hear the roars of the dinosaur. And again, the only thing that I feel like is, aside from the big gaping hole, but is a downside about these figures is, from a playability standpoint, obviously doesn't affect me because I don't play with them, but for a kid, when you want to make the jaw, snap, to do it in a timely manner, you're going to run through the sounds so quickly, so it's not going to be all that great. Like, the sounds are going to be all jumbled and all over the place. So that is definitely a little bit of a downside if you're looking at playing with these figures, but as far as I'm concerned, I don't mind it because I honestly actually really quite like the fact that I can now display the dinosaur with its mouth open like this. That, in my opinion, is a pretty big plus. If only we didn't have that big ugly gaping hole now on the top of the figure. But as far as a size goes, for a length, if I actually move it up a little bit, for a length from the snout, if I don't knock it over now, to the tail, you're looking at about the 13.25 inch range, or about 33.5 centimeters. And then for a height, when it's kind of standing at its, comfortable, I guess you could say, height, you are looking at about 4 inches or 10 centimeters, maybe a little hair over. For a size comparison, there is Mr. Papo T-Rex, the Attack Pack Dilophosaurus, and Robert Muldoon from the Mattel Jurassic World toy line in comparison to our Metriacanthosaurus. And you can definitely see that as far as the size goes, it fits right in the same size range as, first of all, the previous Metriacanthosaurus, but the same size range as all of the previous versions of figures like this, like the Soundstrike and stuff like that. And then for a second comparison, here are the two Metriacanthosaurus figures together, the newest one with the oldest one. And you can see that one huge plus is the fact that we don't have to leave our Metriacanthosaurus standing here with its mouth gaping wide open like it's totally in shock. We can close the mouth and it looks really nice this way with the mouth closed, which I think is way nicer. But you can also see that as far as the sculpt goes, everything appears to be the same for the most part. The only thing that could potentially have been different would be the head sculpts, but looking at the two together, I mean, it's very slight if they are different at all. Like, they look really, really similar if you ask me. Maybe if I held them in the same position, it might look a little bit more reasonable, I guess, to see the two together. There we go. We can kind of see how they look together. They definitely look like they have the same head sculpt, but you can see that we have the seam here to connect the head on the older one, but we don't have that on the newer ones. So maybe the neck is slightly different than the newest one. I'm not entirely sure, but they look pretty awesome together, and definitely two fun Mattel figures, but I certainly am partial to this newest one. So this brand new Roar Attack Jurassic World Camp Cretaceous Metriacanthosaurus is definitely a really nice figure. I absolutely love the sculpt. I always have loved it. I've been a big fan of this figure from the initial figure that they had released that we had just taken a look at. Still a fan of it now. The paint job on this, of course, is one of the only new things to this figure in comparison to the older one. And again, this paint scheme, in my opinion, is the nicest paint scheme that we've had for it so far, or at least as far as what I feel like is nice and natural looking. It's not overly painted, which is not something I think we'll ever see when it comes to a Mattel figure, but sometimes we complain about the lack of paint application to the figures, and I feel like although this one, of course it lacks paint application, like specifically in the nails and stuff, I feel like the tones of color used are so nice together, and honestly everything looks great and nothing looks out of place due to the lack of paint. Like sometimes with the Mattel figures it looks really weird when we don't have paint out onto the tail and stuff like that, but that, in my opinion, is not the case with this one. I think it still looks really good even with the lack of paint out onto the tail, so that is definitely a plus for this figure. I also love, even though I don't like the big ugly seam and hole on the back, but I love the fact that we can keep the mouth closed or open it and it stays that way, because the older one just kind of had its mouth hanging open and looked very awkward, whereas this newer one looks way better as far as like displaying it goes, and definitely is a step up from the older one. The only advantage to the older one was it didn't have the big ugly hole in the back, but the Roar Attack feature is pretty fun, I guess, for what it is, but also allows us to have the option of keeping the mouth open and closed. So even though I initially didn't like it at all, I'm definitely warming up to it, and I love the fact that I can display it however I would like, but I really just still hate that ugly hole on the back. The articulation is pretty fun as well, so as a whole, I think this is definitely a really nice release on the part of Mattel, and certainly worth picking up if you can, in fact, encounter it. So, if you can, in fact, find this in the wild, I recommend picking it up. If it happens to show up on an online retailer somewhere, I will link you guys in the description when I can, in fact, find a link. So, one way or another, it's definitely a fun figure, and I recommend grabbing it if you can find it. So, make sure you do that, and make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next review. Thanks for watching.